We're live. It's a live show. It's my face. I don't just write. I don't just do live rooms where I talk at people. I'm Jeff Rueter of The Athletic, and welcome to the 2026 World Cup coverage. Remember that 2022 tournament that happened? We all loved it. I can't believe that team won the World Cup. And can you believe how far the United States made it and that Mexico lost in the round of 16? One of those I can believe. Mexico in the round of 16 is definitely bread and butter here. So we will go ahead and get started in just a little bit here, or now. They've tweeted it. I'm live already. Thank you very much for tuning in for the athletics coverage. Yes, let's go over some logistics, how 2026 is going to work. First of all, congratulations to 3 qualifiers for this World Cup. You have Canada in their second consecutive World Cup. You have Mexico, and you have the United States of America making it as automatically due to their hosting rights. Keep in mind, unless some monumental change takes place between now and 2026, there will be 48 teams in this tournament. The draw will be much larger. Qualifying will be a little friendlier, especially if you're looking at places like Europe and CONMEBOL, where qualifying is kind of a gauntlet and it's very, very streamlined. And you have teams that are missing by losing one game if they're in Europe, shout out Ukraine, or you have teams that are losing, 6, 7 games and squeaking in because the margins are so thin in South America. So all of that aside, some of the teams that are going to be involved, 3 of them, 45 others will join the party. The draw is likely going to take place in one of Los Angeles or San Francisco per the United 2026, which is the general broader term for this triple coalition of countries hosting the World Cup. They are suggesting San Francisco or Los Angeles serve as the place for the draw. But we're years and years away from that. What we do know already is that there are 16 cities that will be hosting these games. They went from west to east. I'm just going to read them as you can see them to this side of me. Look at that graphic. You've got New York and New Jersey. Don't forget New Jersey, and that they will be probably hosting some games of magnitude. You've got Miami, the 305 represented, Los Angeles. Again, SoFi Stadium is looked at as an early favorite for semifinals and finals alike. We'll see how many of those games go to the City of Angels. You've got Seattle giving a little bit of extra coverage in the northwest of the country. You've got Atlanta, which we learned today is part of the central coalition of hosting cities. It is further west, apparently, than Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's the Midwest. So sure, Atlanta, congratulations on joining the center of North America. You've got Dallas and Houston holding up Texas, a little bit of a Texas two-step there. Minor surprise in terms of hosting cities. There were a few who wondered if FIFA would look at 2 cities from the same state, or if they would look to broaden out their map a little bit more. But you've got both Houston and Dallas, which will be hosting games. Boston will be hosting games. Kansas City will be over at Arrowhead Stadium. Keep in mind, by the way, most of these that we were talking about are NFL stadiums or college football stadiums in the case of the Rose Bowl, if that is involved in Los Angeles's hosting party. We are not talking Major League Soccer stadiums. We are not talking 18 to 25 seaters, 18 to 25,000, of course. We're looking at scopes of 65,000 plus. So Kansas City, that's the Arrowhead. Philadelphia, San Francisco rounds out the coalition of 11 cities across the United States of America, which will be hosting games in the 2026 World Cup. And then you've got Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. Mexico City and Guadalajara, this is their 3rd time hosting games, including the 1970 and 1986 World Cups. Monterrey was not part of that 1970 tournament. And then you have Toronto and Vancouver hosting men's World Cup games for the first time. Of course, they were involved in the 2015 Women's World Cup. So there we are. That's where the tournament's going to take place. Couple of surprises here. I think that the biggest surprise, the city that might feel most slighted, and frankly, the city that most of us were expecting would be involved but ended up missing the party, would be Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. had some struggles. FedEx Field, home of the Washington football team. What are they now? The Guardians? Anyway, their stadium was subpar. There were literally pieces of it falling off. And so they very quickly scrambled to work with the city of Baltimore, where they would be using the Baltimore Ravens field. Ultimately, that bid did not come to fruition. I think it makes sense if you just think about the pure optics of it. Again, You want a national capital involved. However, Ottawa is not going to be involved in Canada, so you can get away with it a little bit easier. It's not so much of an obvious snub. But it's a city that historically has been very favorable to hosting soccer. DC United, a founding member, of course, of Major League Soccer, but also hosting some very important games historically. But ultimately, you look at Boston, Philadelphia, that makes up that sort of northeastern corridor, and Baltimore falls by the wayside, along with Washington, D.C. I've never really understood, just as someone who's in the central time zone, and of course, then Mountain is adjacent to it, why Kansas City is viewed as such a no brainer of a pick, while Denver is seen as a complete outlier and was, in most experts' lists, one of the first easiest cuts as you look at the potential hosting cities. Denver, if you're looking at Mile High Stadium, of course, they've got sponsorship considerations. I'm trying to remember what the field is called, but Mile High Stadium, you all know what I'm talking about, home of the Denver Broncos. It's more accessible than Arrowhead is via transportation, whether you're talking mass transit, whether you're talking public transit, whether you're talking busing, vehicles, whatever the case may be. It's a little easier to get to. The elevation is something that is often praised about Mexico City and the Estadio Azteca as being a unique factor that makes it a difficult place to play. It's the Mile High City. You have the elevation. So it's another city that, there's a little bit of gamesmanship, and maybe you don't like having those games where players are having to conserve their energy, where you're bunkering in, where you're playing a little bit more Mourinho ball, Nacho, whatever you want to say. But I think that there's the potential there. It was a natural grass field that was replaced in 2015 by the Broncos, so that is hospitable, of course, to soccer. You're not having turf. There will have to be some overlays. We've got someone in the comments here, which, by the way, if you have questions, if you have thoughts about cities that got it, cities that didn't, excitement levels for 2026 or just 2022 as well. That World Cup's coming up. You can't escape it, not for a while. So you will have to overlay with the turf. I think that was another big storyline from the 2015 World Cup up in Canada, was turf fields at World Cups do not mix. There are two stadiums in Los Angeles that are under consideration for whatever reason. They did not specify if the Rose Bowl will be involved, but SoFi Stadium, the home of both the Rams and the Chargers, hosted the most recent Super Bowl as well. You've seen it with the big spectacle. Both are involved in the bid. Once you get closer to the tournament, I think we'll get a little bit more clarity on how involved the Rose Bowl will be. But when you're looking at the big games, the final will most likely not be at the Rose Bowl this time. I think SoFi would get priority, given the more modern feel of that venue and the amount of investment that a lot of people have put into that stadium. That was built for big occasions. Rose Bowl, not saying it wasn't, but it is much older. I think it's 100 years old this year. And so the look then would be at SoFi, and its more modern approach to hosting these games, which we're frankly used to seeing now. I mean, you look in Brazil, how many stadiums they had to build for 2014, 2018. Russia, they had to retrofit some stadiums, they had to build some more. Qatar, obviously, they have to build a lot of stadiums for this, right? All in a very small area. So one thing that is nice is the existing infrastructure across North America. You have these stadiums that are equipped to handle 65,000 plus fans and be able to get a highly attended World Cup. There is some pressure here. Keep that in mind, because the 1994 World Cup in the United States of America remains the highest, best attended World Cup on record, men's or women's. And that's something that obviously this group, United 2026, is going to be looking to surpass. They're going to want to keep moving it forward. And that's part of why they work together on this, right? They want to share the glory of it. And I'm sure having guaranteed qualification doesn't hurt when the United States and Canada aren't givens these days. So we'll go from there. Otherwise, in terms of surprises, I don't think it's necessarily a surprise that Atlanta is involved. Again, it's a surprise that it's central, but when you look at the other cities that were announced, it is more central. So fair play in that sense, but it's become a very good destination. It's become a very good city that has grown an organic soccer culture. And I know that the word organic usually induces eye rolls when you talk about American soccer, especially around Major League Soccer and the expansion model, rather than having the, again, more grassroots approach of a team rising up the ranks or starting based off of a club as they historically did. But keep in mind, it's not a given that these cities, which have Major League Soccer teams, are going to be a good fit for just a good soccer city, for having that feel that the sport is relevant and you didn't just drop into play games because a building is there. As someone's mentioning in the comments, shout out Daniel H. Atlanta is an air hub. It's an international air hub. It also is the home of a lot of major corporations, and so you have a built-out infrastructure. You have a lot of places to stay. CNN is there. It wouldn't surprise me if media is looked at as a factor in Atlanta's presence, and the ability to cover it with pre-existing, studios, camera crews, just overall people and buildings that are conducive to covering major events. Wolf Blitzer, I'm sure, is going to be opening up his house and welcoming all of us in to stay in the city of Atlanta. So good to see Atlanta involved with it. Again, personally bummed that Denver's not in it, but I do get it. I do get it as you look at the geography of the map. I think that Seattle makes a lot of sense to include. You need to have a couple of cities in each country. Canada only having 2 and Edmonton not getting it. I think that clearly that's the 2 strongest potential host cities involved. I don't think that you would necessarily bump either of them to get Edmonton in the mix. So fair play on that front. And as you look at the rest of the cities, I mean, some of these decisions were made early. Keep that in mind too. I think that, Las Vegas, Phoenix, I'm just a map, San Diego, Tampa, Washington, D.C., again, no longer is involved in this, but Chicago, Illinois. These are some major cities, especially skewing towards the United States, but these are some major cities that I think if you were just looking, okay, which 11 markets in the United States of America are you including? They didn't have the infrastructure for it. Chicago did not have a bid together in time that was cohesive. They're still working on getting the Chicago Bears their own stadium out of the city of Chicago. It's up in the air what's going to happen with Soldier Field. There were just better options out there. Minneapolis stadium is still just a little bit too small. US Bank Stadium, where the Minnesota Vikings play, Allianz Field, of course, is about 20,000 fans. So that's a non-starter as well. And it's a turf field, and seemed pretty unlikely that was going to change in time for 2026. So if you're looking at the central options, that does limit it. And so you bring in a natural central powerhouse of the country like Atlanta, Georgia, to fill that out. Where will the first game be at? So this is going to be fun moving forward, trying to figure out where these important games are. I think that all of these cities will want the first game. Understandably, it's where the cameras are. It's where you have the grand moments. You think about the 2010 World Cup where Shabalala scores the first goal for South Africa, a goal for Africa. I think was the Peter Drury call. You want that moment. You want that because that starts every highlight reel of the tournament, the official film of the tournament. I think that the best version of that was still the Michael Caine narrated 1986 World Cup video. That full movie lives on YouTube, by the way, after the passing of Diego Armando Maradona. Highly recommend you watch it if you haven't yet, because that is the size of grandeur around these tournaments. And, the first game, where will it be? I think in my gut, it comes down to, again, this is just me speculating here. I think it comes down to Mexico City. I think it comes down to New York, New Jersey. And I think it comes down to Los Angeles if it's not hosting both semifinals and finals. But I mean, look, there's not bad choices. I hope that a Canadian city does get late tournament action. There is some questions about if they'll be involved even at the quarterfinal level. We'll see. But there are some historic venues for the sport, probably none in the continent that are more historic than Estadio Azteca. And so it would be a shame if that was not involved in some of these other larger scale games, whether that's the opening kickoff or that is towards the end here. Open to a couple other questions. Otherwise, I think it's pretty straightforward. We've got, 3 years now, 4 years to dissect. 4 years, I can count. 4 years to dissect these choices, to figure out where some of these games will live, and ultimately forecast the tournament. We've got a whole other men's tournament and a women's tournament. I'm just going to take a sip out of this classic 1994 World Cup mug before we get going again. But, there's a lot happening between now and then. They're going to have a different qualification format. That's going to be something to follow in the coming years as well, as you open it up from 32 teams to 48. but it's going to be a lot of fun, right? It's a World Cup. And I think one factor of this one that's important, I talked about the stadium infrastructure being present, but part of the bid book, if you look over United 2026 guide to all of the finalist cities, including the six that were not included in this roster of host cities, was the human rights factor. How are you going to ensure that you're not running into the issues that we had in some of the past 3, 4 World Cups? On the men's side, certainly, where as these stadiums are being rushed, forced to be built, it does become a human rights issue. It really does, and you're seeing it kind of swept under the rug in some ways by Qatar. If you're looking at the broader coverage, we at the Athletic have several pieces about why that is such a controversial pick. And why the specific way that they have gone about putting together that World Cup is controversial. So please take a look at that coverage. Maybe that'll be linked to it will certainly be linked to in the coming months as we gear up for that tournament. But you can find the Athletic on Twitter. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it everywhere. We're growing. But you can find me personally on Twitter as well at Jeff Rueter, Rueter. They even spelled it. They have a graphic. It's so nice. I wish I just walked around with a graphic, but I guess that's what name tags are. Thank you for watching, and congratulations to the markets involved. My condolences to the markets that were not, and we'll see you in the future.